If you were born after 1990, your risk of colon cancer is double what your parents' generation faced at your age. And researchers are still trying to figure out why. What changed? Hey, beautiful people, welcome or welcome back to Well with Mika, where we talk real wellness for your real life. Today, we're going to talk about something that's been showing up in the news more and more lately. Every time I listen, read, I hear colon cancer come up. So it's for good reason that we are going to discuss this topic today. For a long time, the colorectal cancer, it was considered a disease that mostly affected older adults, right? Screening recommendations used to start at age 50, and for many people, it wasn't something that they even thought about until later in life. But now that assumption is changing. Doctors and researchers are now seeing that more cases of colon cancer in younger adults. And when I say younger adults, I'm talking people in their 20s, their 30s, and 40s. And it's happening not just in the US, but around the world. It's showing up earlier and earlier. So today I want to talk about what the data is actually showing, what researchers think might be contributing to this shift. And we've discussed it before. We've discussed at least one contributing factor. And most importantly, what we all can do realistically to reduce our risk, okay? Because, while some parts of the story is still unfolding, one thing we do know is that colon cancer is one of the most preventable cancers that we have. So let's really get into what's happening, what they think is happening, and what we can do as individuals and collectively to decrease our risk. So before I go on, let's clear up something because I had this confusion at one point. When we use the term colon cancer, it's really talking about colorectal cancer, which colorectal cancer is the umbrella term for cancers that start in the large intestine. Okay, that's my understanding. There are two main types, right? There's colon cancer, which begins in the colon, which is the first and the longest part of the large intestine. And then there's rectal cancer, which begins in the rectum, which is the last few inches before the anus. And they share many of the same symptoms and risk factors, but doctors seem to distinguish them because treatment approaches are different, like especially surgery and radiation. Those can be different depending on which one you have. So the key factor for survival apparently is early detection, which is why screening is so important. Okay, so now that we have the definitions out of the way, all right, let's get into the details. So in the US, about 150,000 people are diagnosed with colorectal cancer each year, and more than 50,000 people die from it annually. So that makes it the second leading cause of cancer death in the country. And the part that researchers are paying closer attention to is that the rates of colon cancer in adults over 50 have actually been declining for years. So it's like, okay, hold on. So older adults have declining rates. What is going on? Now, that's mostly seemingly because of screening. Colonoscopies and other screening tools, they can find and remove precancerous polyps before they become cancer. So that's why we talk about the importance of screening, right? But on the flip side, they've been going up in younger adults. So since the 90s, colon cancer in people under 50 has been increasing by about 1 to 2% per year. And today it's now one of the leading causes of cancer death for adults under 50. And because of this shift, screening guidelines, they had to be lowered, right? They were recently lowered. So instead of starting at age 50 for screening, most recommendations now say to begin around age 45. So, I mean, yes, 5 years definitely makes a huge difference in, survival rates and success. But I mean, if I'm looking at the fact that the rates are increasing even in 20s and 30s. I mean, I'm wondering if this should just become recommended, if the screening recommendation should be lowered even more. But I mean, that's just me thinking out loud. I mean, we'll see what the guidelines do, right? And now what's happening is it's not just happening in the US. Researchers studying cancer trends across dozens of countries, they found that rising early onset colon cancer rates in many places of the world is happening. And we're talking parts of Asia, South America, the Caribbean, and several high income countries like the US and Australia. Now, some countries with the highest rates of early onset colorectal cancer include places like South Korea and Puerto Rico. But it's important to remember that many regions of the world, they don't even have strong like cancer registries or widespread screening, which means that there could be underreporting going on in some areas. So, but even with that, like the pattern is still very clear. This is not just like a local issue. Something is going on, something broader is happening, and we all really need to get clear on what's happening. And I'm praying that, the research can really dig into it and find out what's going on. And another thing that confuses people with these discussions on cancer statistics and reporting is it's in the reporting itself. Actually, it's like in the US it's stated that the number of colon cancer cases occurs, the largest amount occur among white Americans, but that doesn't necessarily mean white Americans are at the highest risk. That's because white Americans represent a larger share of the population, right? So that's why that is the case. But when researchers adjust the numbers and look at rates per population, there's a completely different picture that comes out. And that is Black Americans actually have the highest rates of colorectal cancer incidence and the highest death rates from the disease in the US. So Black patients, they're more likely to be diagnosed at later stages when the disease is harder to treat. And yes, there's several contributing factors to the disparity. It could be differences in screening access. We already know there are healthcare system barriers, socioeconomic factors, and in some cases, there might even be possible differences in the biology of the tumors themselves. So it's an important reminder that statistics, they don't always tell the whole story unless you really understand how they're measured and really pay attention and dig deep and ask questions. So if colon cancer rates are rising in younger adults, right? The obvious question, of course, is why. And the honest answer, it seems, is that they don't really know yet fully. At one point, and we discussed this recently, they were pointing to ultra processed foods, which is a possible contributing factor, which seems like it's actually a very large contributing factor, right? But then there's also some other interesting clues, because one of the most important ideas that scientists are studying is something called a birth cohort effect. Now, what that simply refers to is a group of people born during the same time period. So when they compare health patterns across generations, that's what they're calling the birth cohort effect. And what they're finding is that people born more recently appear to have a higher risk of developing colon cancer earlier in life than people born decades earlier. So even when researchers compare people at the same age, so for example, some studies found that people born around 1990, they have about double the risk of colon cancer compared with people born around 1950. And the risk of rectal cancer may be several times higher than that. So that suggests something about the environment that we're all growing up in and how that's influencing us, influencing our risk decades later. And that raises a bunch of interesting points about childhood health habits, right? And on top of our environment, because for a long time, and many people, what they did is we thought about childhood nutrition as kind of like throwaway years. Like, oh, kids, they could eat anything they want. Their body's going to bounce back. They could handle it. But, I mean, if we really step back and look at it, the food environment today is very different from the one our parents and grandparents grew up in. Our, lived in environment is different. So that doesn't mean policing every bite your child takes, but it does mean maybe we should be a little, if not a lot, more intentional about the patterns we're building. Things like making sure real fruits and veggies show up regularly, the fiber part, of everyday meals, encouraging movement, and being thoughtful about things like heavily processed meats or unnecessary antibiotics. Now, I say unnecessary, not meaning, we ban all antibiotics, just meaning, be mindful. Ask your doctor, like, is this necessary? Don't be quick to just, prescribe or give your child antibiotics. It just means, if it's unnecessary, like, oh, I'm not sure what this is, take an antibiotic just in case type of administration of the thing. So, scientists, they're really looking at several possible explanations. So there's no single factor that explains everything, but there are, like I said, a few patterns that keep showing up. And one major one is diet, right? So younger generations have grown up eating significantly more ultra processed foods, refined sugars, processed meats, and fiber intake has declined. And we know fiber plays an important role in colon health. And, it also feeds that beneficial gut bacteria, which reduces inflammation and moves waste through the digestive system more efficiently. When your fiber intake goes down, the waste that it just remains in the colon longer and potentially increases exposure to harmful compounds. And then another area, as we just touched on, is, of course, gut microbiome. That keeps showing up. The trillions of microbes that live in our digestive systems, they influence many aspects of our health, including immune function and inflammation. Some scientists, they are investigating specific bacterial toxins that damage our DNA, things like certain strains of E. coli that have been found more frequently in tumors from younger colon cancer patients. And it's looking like, at the early life exposures like antibiotic use, childhood diet, obesity and metabolic disease, and environmental chemicals, those are factors that can shape the microbiome and our metabolic health long before any symptoms even appear. Now, I know that might have sounded like a lot. I don't want the conversation to be overwhelming or sound like complete doom and gloom, because there genuinely is encouraging news. And that is that these, the colon cancers actually have, there's actually a great amount of power that we have to prevent them. Screening, of course, can detect precancerous growths before they turn into cancer, but also the lifestyle factors that we touched on: eating the fiber rich foods, maintaining a healthy weight, moving regularly, limiting processed meats, and paying attention to digestive system symptoms. You want to make sure that you're paying attention to your body. None of these steps that, they don't really guarantee that you will never develop it, but it's definitely meaningful in terms of lowering your risk. I just think it's important for us to really pay attention, especially for younger adults. Don't just ignore your symptoms, just because you think, oh, I'm too young for colon cancer. I'm too young for this to be meaningful. Like, oh, yes, I have this thing happening, but it probably is nothing. Don't ignore it, Symptoms include persistent changes in your bowel habits, unexplained weight loss, abdominal pain, fatigue, or, blood in your stool. Don't ignore those things. And yes, they can be caused by many different conditions, not just, cancer, but they're still worth discussing with your primary care, your healthcare provider, okay? One of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this topic, because it sits right at the intersection of personal health choices and the larger environmental patterns. It reminds us that health is not just about individual willpower. It's also shaped by the systems we live in, our food environment, our stress levels, our access to care, the habits that we develop early in life that a lot of us, we don't have control over that. As a child, you do what you're told, you make do it what you're given. But even within that bigger picture, we still have room to influence our daily choices now. And that's where that real wellness mindset comes in. So when we talk about health, people, we often think about these big dramatic changes, but most of the time it's really just about the everyday stuff. What are we eating most of the time? How often are we moving? Whether we're getting enough rest, and whether we're actually paying attention when our body's trying to get our attention. Like, yo, sis, pay attention. You ain't here trying to tell you something, like, look, listen. That's where a lot of our real health is built, in the patterns of our everyday life and in, paying attention. So if researchers are right that some of these risks start building earlier in life, then, those everyday patterns, they matter not just for us, but for the kids growing up around us too. So I just want us to really consider this conversation, take it seriously, and I hope that you found it helpful. Make sure to please like it, subscribe, and share this episode so people can join in on the conversation. Maybe it'll, enlighten them, bring this topic to the forefront so that they know what to look for in themselves and in their loved ones. And, if you have any thoughts about the topic, please share them in the comment section. I'd love to hear them. As always, happy health and peace.